for a sister that passed away, inshallah. After we finish the brief Khatira, we will make a brief dua for her, inshallah. There's a narration collected by Al-Hafiz al-Imam Muslim, rahimahullah. This narration is on the authority of Abu Huraira, radiyallahu anhu. We mentioned Abu Huraira before many times. His name is Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr al-Dawsi, radiyallahu anhu. He passed away in the year 59 after Hijrah, after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated from Mecca to Medina. This narration discusses a topic that has been debated and differed upon amongst humanity since the very beginning of literature. As far back as we can see, prophets and messengers came to us to discuss it, and it's actually one of the pillars of Iman because it is such a controversial and pertinent topic to our existence. That is that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked to define Iman, Jibreel asked him in the narration of Umar, what is Iman? He said, to believe in Allah and His angels and His messages and His books and His prophets and the last day, وَتُؤْمِن بِالْقَدَرِ خَيْرِ وَشَرِّ. He said, and that you believe in decree and destiny, in fate, the good of it and the bad of it. And he mentions the good of it and the bad of it, and that all decree is something that has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a pillar of faith, pillar of Iman. A person cannot be Muslim without believing in this. Now, many people are confused about this topic because of one of two things. They're confusing and conflating believing in the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and understanding the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now those are two very different things. We don't have to understand the intricacies of something to benefit from it or to use it or to believe in its existence. Rather, we are given a very general knowledge of the decree of Allah. And then for those who are more advanced in knowledge, more advanced in the sciences of Islam, more acquainted with the decree of, with the revelations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they have a deeper understanding. However, the issue of decree is not something that we are going to try to figure out tonight. Rather, we want to know, what is it that I am supposed to do and believe with regards to the past and with regards to the future? See, that issue of balancing belief in the decree, belief that Allah has written everything 50,000 years before the creation of the heavens and the earth, and also that I, as a creature in Allah's creation, have choice and freedom of choice and free will, that balance. And so there are folks that believe that it is all free will, there is no decree. And then there are those who believe that there is all decree and no free will. And the truth is always in the middle of those two extremes. We have free will, yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed that free will. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sums this up in one verse. He says, وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. You all do not will anything or desire it except that Allah first wills it. What does that mean? That can mean many things. Does that mean that I will it because Allah willed it? Or does that mean that Allah willed it, but I chose to will it? These are issues that huge books have been written on and discussed in great detail and depth. And those amongst the servants of Allah, the scholars of Islam, who truly are going to grasp the epitome of the decree of Allah and its nature and its connection to human free will, are very few. And for this reason, the Prophet ﷺ said to his companions, he said, إِذَا ذُكِرَ الْقَدْرُ فَأَمْسِكُوا. He said, if decree becomes an issue of discussion, refrain from interjecting. Refrain from speaking about this. And in one narration, which is authentic, the Prophet ﷺ heard two companions outside of his home. They were in the masjid, and he heard them debating fiercely about this topic. One companion was mentioning verses of the Quran which articulate free will, and the other was countering with verses which articulate decree of Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ came out to them and was clearly, visibly upset and said, do you wish to strike down verses of the Quran using other verses of the Quran? And this is not an intellectual debate where we wish to see who can outsmart and be more clever than the other. Rather, this is an issue which is a very tender, careful issue. Just because you win a particular debate doesn't mean that you've unlocked the secrets of the universe. Now, this issue of decree and free will, what is upon the believer? The believer, his motto or his anthem or his mantra, if you will, is سمعنا وأطعنا آمنا به كل من عند ربنا صدق الله. The anthem of the believer is we hear and we obey. Allah has spoken that which is absolute truth. That we affirm what Allah affirms, we negate whatever Allah negates. That is what our responsibility is. And that's what makes us believers. We believe. Our implementation of the Quran and its commandments and prohibitions does not hinge on us understanding the wisdoms behind all of these things. Rather, it hinges on us understanding that Allah has commanded this or Allah has prohibited this. That is enough for us. The Prophet ﷺ sums this up for us in a very eloquent narration. This narration has been collected by Imam Muslim on the authority of Abu Hurairah, that the Prophet ﷺ said, احرص على ما ينفعك واستعن بالله ولا تعجز. He gives us two things. He says, number one, احرص على ما ينفعك. Seek and pursue that which is of consequence to you, that which is going to benefit you. Get out there and earn it. واستعن بالله ولا تعجز. And seek aid in Allah and do not ever give up in those pursuits. Then he tells us, ولا تقولن لشيء أصابك لو أني فعلت كان كذا وكذا ولكن قولوا قدر الله وما شاء فعل فإن لو تفتح عمل الشيطان. He says, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, pursue those things which are beneficial to you, seek aid in Allah, and do not give up. And do not look back at something that afflicted you and say if only I had done such and such, the consequence would have been different. For indeed, if only, this mindset, not the actual words, but this mindset, this opens the doors of the actions of a shaitan. What does that mean? How do we know that Allah has decreed something? There's only one way for us human beings to understand that Allah has decreed this. I am positive that Allah decreed this. There's only one way for us to know that, and that is that it's in the past. Once it has happened, we are positive that Allah decreed this thing. No matter what it is, Allah decreed it. We cannot say Allah decrees something in the future. That's a different story. I don't have any knowledge of that. And my free will is still something that can be exercised at that point. But when something is in the past, the moment it is in the past, the moment it has come to be or has not come to be, I know for a fact that Allah has willed that. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَأَنَّا كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَاهُ بِقَدَرٍ. He says, and indeed everything we have created it with decree. We have sized it and created it especially to perfection. And so anything that has been created, it's in the past, it has happened, it is the decree of Allah. So what in the world could I possibly do with my little human hands and my little human brain that's going to change the will of Allah? What is it? For me to sit back and look at the past and say, well, if I would have chosen such and such, then this would have happened. How arrogant. Can you imagine the hubris, the arrogance that is involved in such a mindset? You're just a little human being, a little ant, nothing. In the big scheme of things, you and me, we're just little people. We cannot reach into the heavens and change the scrolls of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when something is in the past, it doesn't mean that I don't have responsibility. But it does mean that Allah has decreed it. And if Allah has decreed it, what do we say to Allah's decree? آمَنَّا بِهِ كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا. So the Prophet ﷺ teaches us, how do we look at the past? How do we not let those regrets eat us apart? He teaches us, ﷺ, do not look at something that is past and say, if only I had done such and such would have been the result. Rather say, this is the decree of Allah, and what He decreed, He made happen. What He decided, what He willed, occurred. For indeed, lo, this opens the gates and the actions of a shaitan. Things like depression and regrets that don't help you get better in the future. Regrets that only weigh you down and tear you apart for no reason. Make you miserable because you can't change the past and you give up on trying to improve on the future. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bimannihi wa karamihi to make us of those who have the enlightenment and the insight to be able to recognize the truth and distinguish it from falsehood, and that He give us the courage to follow that truth, and that He give us the honor and nobility of dying for and upon that truth. We will inshallah make dua for our departed sister. Allahumma inna nas'aluka bi asma'ika al-husna wa sifatika al-ula an taghfir laha. Allahumma ighfir laha dhunubaha. اللهم اغفر لها ذنوبها اللهم ارفع درجتها في المهديين واكتبها في عليين والحقها بالصالحين واغسلها من ذنبها بالماء والثلج والبرد ونقها من الذنوب والخطايا كما ينقى الثوب الأبيض من الدنس وباعد بينها وبين خطاياها كما باعدت بين المشرق والمغرب اللهم أكرم نزلها ووسع مدخلها ونور ضريحها ومد قبرها واجعل قبرها روضة من رياض الجنة اللهم أبدلها دارا خيرا من دارها وأهلا خيرا من أهلها واجعل الموت راحة لها اللهم إن كانت محسنة فزد لها في إحسانها، وإن كان عليها من ذنب فتغمدها في عظيم وواسع غفرانك. اللهم لا تفتنا بعدها ولا تحرمنا أجرها، واغفر لنا ولها. اللهم آمين. وصل اللهم وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين، والحمد لله رب العالمين، وجزاكم الله خيرا.